each and every one of you in Radio Land, at home and abroad. This is the Global View on Q. We are live on YouTube and Facebook at Q95 FM Radio or YSQ FM. Share the live. Invite your friends to join the Q family right now and get the latest breaking local, regional, and international news and happenings.
Books.
Acknowledge you on the other online streaming platforms. It's Tuesday, 22nd February 2022, just about 7:35 in the studios at Q95 right now. The big station, it's the 8th Tuesday of 2022. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G, and my distinguished guest tonight, Attorney Gabriel Christian, Pan-Africanist Dr. James Small. You will hear a lot about him tonight. Pan-Africanist Dr. Leonard Jeffries, him as well, both famous Black men. You're going to know a lot more about them than you might know right now. It's still Black History Month, of course. Our historic series on the evolution of Dominica's political leaders continues, their lives, their leadership, their legacies. And tonight we begin to make the transition from our discussions on our earlier past leaders. And from next Tuesday night, we're moving on to our more recent and present day leaders in Dominica. So in the meantime, our distinguished guest tonight will reference the works of freedom fighters who laid the foundation for the struggle for freedom and dignity of Afro-Caribbean, Kalinago, and other people of color, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, the NAACP, Uhuru Fighters, Black Panthers, and the progressive groups in Dominica, the Caribbean, and the North American region. We will examine the works of frontier fighters like Edward Scobie, Dr. James Small, Nelson Mandela, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. William Parr Rivera, our very own Dr. Charles Mitchell, a close friend and confidant of Dr. Jeffries, Rosie Douglas, our own Rosie Douglas, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, all the way out there in South Sudan, advising the government there, trying to make peace over there. They call him the Uniter. Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Adam Clayton Powell, Elridge Cliver, Marcus Garvey, the great Marcus Garvey, Rap Brown, Louis Farrakhan, and others who led the fight for freedom, democracy, and dignity. Some died, some were beaten, others were jailed, but they set the stage for the evolution of contemporary organizations like the Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, NIDCLF, NIDCLIF, to continue the fight for freedom. So we continue our discussion or the education series on the economic, political, social, theological, ethical, spiritual, cultural, and including the music aspects of our history and growth of our Afro-Caribbean Kalinago brothers and sisters in the tailwinds of the actions of our forebears and the lessons learned from them that help shape the lives, the leadership, the legacies of the political leaders of Dominica over the years. So we are doing this tonight before we launch into the more recent eras of Prime Ministers Oliver J. Serafin, Dame Mary Eugenia Charles, Edison Chenfield James, Roosevelt Douglas, Pierre Charles, and current Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt. From next week, we'll be looking at those. My distinguished guests, Attorney Gabriel Christian, Dr. James Small, and Dr. Jeffries will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous with inputs from callers, relatives, and friends at home and abroad. We will examine and compare the legacies of all of those leaders and those that went before them. And we'll do so with no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness. Just bringing back civility, a caring society, good governance, peace and love among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, join this conversation on the Global View on Q and have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. As usual, give a huge shout out, hugs, much love and appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers doing their best to keep us safe this deadly coronavirus and its new variants, often working under very difficult conditions. Please follow the correct advice, guidelines, and protocols. Play it safe, stay alive. Happy to have you with us tonight. We welcome and embrace you wherever you are in every community in Dominica, in the region, and in the wider global community. You know the numbers. We're happy that our engineer Sheridan Norris is keeping us on the air, and Lambert Charles is on the console at Q95. He will direct the traffic, and as usual, he will direct your calls to us a little later on. We're going to get started now, and as I go first to Attorney Gabriel Christian to get the conversation going on the works of the freedom fighters who laid the foundation for the struggle for freedom and dignity of our Afro-Caribbean, Kalinago, and other people of color, like our own Edward Scobie, as I said before. And I will ask Gabriel to open the innings with his own contribution, and then I'm going to ask him to do the honor of introducing Dr. Small as soon as he's made his contribution. But I wanted, Gabriel, as I go over to you, and you can open your mic in preparation for that. As I go over to you, I wanted to take a little look at a few things that are happening. Because we know that we talk about Pan-Africanism, how much of that is visible in Africa itself? I mean, the African countries, the leaders, are they getting along with each other and really creating that sort of linkage over there? Or are we seeing too much of this other people, the same colonialist type of thing? For example, we're hearing a lot about the Chinese in Africa. A lot of Chinese doing very well, while Africans sometimes are not doing that well. We hear about Chinese in the Caribbean, like in Jamaica, doing very well, but the Jamaicans themselves, indigenous, sometimes are not doing so well. So in terms of all of this, how are we really making out these days? And I'm hoping that Dr. Small will address some of those things, because I think it's very important. Even in Dominica, we see some of this happening. So Gabriel, let me go over to you and let me allow you to make your opening remarks.
A pleasant good evening to you, Brother Sheridan Gregoire. A pleasant good evening to the Dominicans at home and abroad and the friends of Dominica who listen to Q95 to get a dose of education, that which will expand the circumference of our knowledge. Pleasant good evening to Brother Lambert Charles at Master Control and the Technical Director, Brother Sheridan Morris. I want to take a moment to really salute to our brother, Dr. James Smalls, and our indefatigable warrior and his colleague, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. I remember when I was at college in my 20s in DC, the name Dr. Jeffries was very much in the news. Little did I know that his colleague was the Dominican scholar, former Dominica Grammar School leader, and former pilot officer in the Royal Air Force in World War II, Dr. Edward Scobie. In Dominica, before he adopted the name Scobie, he was Edward Dalrymple. Both Dr. Smalls and Dr. Jeffries have blazed a trail in information, education, for the purpose of the development of our Pan-African consciousness and the development of our people. I want to take a moment here now at this time to state that we have to thank Mr. Gregoire and Q95 for being architects of a series of programs on education and leadership. And so today we are graced with two notable leaders of the African diaspora who have been in academia and who in Black History Month of 2022 will do their level best to inform us. So at the end of this program this evening, we'll be all better off for it. Before I go into the biography of the rather lengthy biography, and I'll try to be precise, of Dr. Smalls, I would like Dominicans who are listening to know that in 1900, at the first Pan-African Conference in London, there's a Dominican attorney by the name of George James Christian, who later went to settle in what is now the Gold Coast, and who contributed an essay, How Europe Has Made a Battlefield of Our Motherland, decrying the colonialism that was decimating African peoples. He had been a teacher in Dominica, and then when he passed away, was one of the distinguished lawyers in the Gold Coast and a member of the Gold Coast legislature. I also want to state that during the 1900s, after World War II, the leader of the leader of the Universal Negro Improvement Association in the Caribbean was no less a person than J. Ralph Kazemi. He represented the UNIA from Cuba all the way through Panama, and he was an organizer of the 1932 conference in Dominica on West Indian Federation and West Indian Unity. So again, Dominica has had a very profound impact, small though we may be, as a country that has promoted and prospered the philosophy of Pan-Africanism. If you move along, then you have Dr. Edward Scobie. After he served in World War II, he launched the largest Black-owned magazine, Tropics, in the history of the United Kingdom. I did not know that particular fact until last year when I did an essay on our diaspora. And tonight, Dr. Smalls and Dr. Jeffries will tell us much more about our beloved brother, Edward Scobie, who also authored many important works such as Black Britannia and the Global African Presence. I want to also state that when I first spoke to Dr. Smalls, he said, well, you know, you come from a small country, but a tough country. I said, what do you mean? He said, Dominica has provided the world with many greats. And he went on to tell me that he knew Rosie Douglas. And so we know Rosie Douglas was most likely, the record reflects, the most eminent Pan-African scholar and leader of the Caribbean in the 20th century. I want our listening audience to know that it was during COVID-19 that I came across the book, Moving Against the System, by David Austin of College in Montreal, who noted that Rosie Douglas was the co-chairman of the Black Writers Conference of 1968 in Montreal, a few months before the uprising at Sir George William University. And the greats were there: Walter Rodney, Stokely Carmichael, Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party. All of these great leaders were there in Montreal. In fact, Wikipedia notes that event as the largest Black Power conference outside the United States in the entire 21st century. So Dominicans, as a small country, we must be possessed of the dignity which comes or can only come from the knowledge of self. The Chinese are doing what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese are doing it because they have a knowledge of their Chinese history. Our governments in the Caribbean and in Africa do a poor job of providing a history of the African slave trade, of Africa before Europeans came to Africa, because we had civilization before they came to Africa, not after they came to Africa. If we are possessed of that knowledge, we can then stand up on our own 2 feet, and we can be much more resilient against predatory practices that have in the United States dispossessed Black people of their land. And in the Caribbean, places like Dominica, increasingly, local people are being edged out, obliterated from the economic mainstream because of wrong-headed leadership that has sold our patrimony for a mess of pottage. So, gentlemen, before going any further, let me thank you for coming on. And I want to give thanks to my wife, because it was my wife who listened to a program, not a program, a short speech by Dr. Smalls a week or two ago. He has since told me it was an older speech where he spoke emphatically about the importance of Pan-Africanism. And I reached out to him, and he was so kind to come on board. So who's Dr. Smalls? I'll talk about him first because we'll start up with him, and we'll get to Brother Jeffries. Dr. Smalls is an activist and has been an activist since his teenage years. His in-depth knowledge, thought-provoking, and calm delivery are influential elements to break the programming of miseducation. He studies extensively with Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Joseph A. Ben Jokinen, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Francis Quest Wellesley, and certainly he told me he was mentored by our very own Dr. Edward Scobie. For 11 years, Professor Smalls served as the principal bodyguard to the late Ella Collins, the sister of Malcolm X, the then president of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. He was the Imam of the Muslim Mosque, Inc., founded by Malcolm X between the years 1966 and 1980. So, folks, this is the gentleman on our program this evening who knew Malcolm X and who walked alongside Malcolm X. And so it is really gratifying to have him in our midst. Between the years 1966 and 1980, Professor Smalls held membership in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, the NAACP, and the OAAU. During this period, Professor Smalls had the opportunity to interact with such historical giants as Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, the late Kwame Ture, H. Rap Brown of SNCC, Elridge Cleaver, Zayed Shakur, and Lumumba Shakur of the Black Panther Party, in which he served as liaison between the Black Panther Party and the OAAU. Much of his expertise is founded in African American history and culture and the Malcolm X's tradition of African traditional religions and love of his people. Professor Smalls taught for 15 years at the City University of New York, including 13 years at the City College of New York, Black History, or Black Studies Department, rather, where he taught courses on Pan-Africanism, on Malcolm X, and on comparative African religions, which included several African spiritual systems, titled African Religion and Survival. He also taught for 2 years at New York City Technical College, teaching the course African Folklore and Religion, both in the diaspora and Africa. Dr. Smalls is educated, holds a degree, a Bachelor of Arts degree from the City College at the City University of New York, and a doctorate of divinity from Amin-Ra Theological Seminary in Los Angeles, California. Dr. Smalls, there's much, much more I can say in way of your commendations from the Mayor of New York and other places, Mayor of LA, but I will stop at this point in time to commend you, sir, for being a giant among giants of Pan-Africanism, the unity of our people, and the love of our people. Welcome to Dominica via Q95.
Yes, and that was a mouthful, Gable. I know this was heavy on the Dr. Smalls. I think you want to turn on your mic because your mic may be off.
So I want to thank Brother Sheridan and Brother Gabriel for inviting Dr. Jeffries and myself into this forum tonight and to speak with the people of Dominica, both at home and abroad, and other Africans throughout the Caribbean. The way I was taught by and Scobie and Dr. Jeffries were my primary teachers after Malcolm X and his sister Ella. But the way I was taught by Dr. Scobie and Dr. Jeffries, the more you know, the more servant you be. The more you know, the more servant you be. Because too many of us who are the political leaders or the spiritual leaders or the intellectual leaders think they're to be looked up to. Yes, they're to be respected for the work they've done and the skills they've earned. But we only exist because our people need us. We exist. They give us our existence because they don't know. And so we look up to God Almighty and we serve everybody else, including God Almighty. And if people can understand that, that's right out of African culture. The kings and the priests in Africa, they were not despots. They didn't have no money. The people took care of them. Their job was to serve the people, keep harmony and justice, teach the laws and the tradition, and set an example with their own behavior. And so they didn't rule over people. They were council of states and councils of elders that made the decisions that the kings had to carry out. And so when we think of democracy, you find that its birthplace is not in Europe at all, but you find that its birthplace is in ancient Egypt, ancient Kush, ancient Mali, ancient Ghana, those great African empires. The Swahili state, the great Swahili empires, the great Manamatapa Empire in Southern Africa. And we know very little about these great empires that existed before Europeans could read. And in no disrespect, it's just the facts. And when we went into Europe in the 800s, through Spain and into France, we built their first universities. We brought the first soap. We brought medicine and books that was printed. People had never seen that in Europe before the 800s. you know. And if you go to Eastern Europe, you'll find that the Greeks will tell you out of their own mouths. So I'll take one Greek and then I'll go talking about Dr. Scobie a bit. But there was one Greek. His name was Plato, considered to be one of the greatest philosophers in the world. And he was. Plato was an extraordinary philosopher, an extraordinary writer. But if you were to get a history book on mathematics, it's called The History of Mathematics by Kujari. Chapter 1, in the introduction, he quotes Plato from one of Plato's biggest writing, the Phaedrus, P-H-E-D-R-U-S. And in the Phaedrus, Plato says, the Ethiopians, meaning the Black people, have given the world all of its sciences. This is Plato. The Ethiopians, he said, has given the world all of its sciences. And then he begins to recount them. He said, they've given the world arithmetic. They've given the world geometry. They've given the world medicine. They've given the world astronomy. He names all the great science of that day. And then he said, the greatest science of all that Ethiopia has given to the world is the science of writing itself. And this is Mr. Plato. You can't argue with him. He's the man. Right? We've accepted this in every university in the world, you know, and we can use others. Aristotle said similar things. And I went back there because a lot of times our people think when we are speaking, we are making up things to aggrandize African people. So I'll send you to the greatest of the white world. They did this before us, you know. Herodotus, the father of history, was very clear that the Africans helped establish the very foundation of philosophy in Greece and the very religion in Greece. Homer, in his great Odyssey and Iliad, which is considered in the European world the first book, in the Odyssey and the Iliad, he said, all the gods, this is Homer, and he's a great man, all the gods of Greece must return to Ethiopia every season to renew themselves. But no one teaches us this in our schools and our universities. But it's important you understand that so you can see we're not making up stories to aggrandize ourselves. We're trying to tell history as best we can. And so something happened in Africa. Wars occurred. People invaded our lands. For 1,500 years, the Turks who ran the Islamic system was running slavery in Africa. And then the 1400s came and they brought their enslavement system to the Western Christians who came under the Catholic Church. And one of the first places we were extracted out of Africa and brutally brought across the Atlantic and landed in this place, Dominica, is among one of the first places where the Africans were taken, starting in Dominican Republic, what is Dominican Republic, Haiti, until we get down the chain to Dominica. And yet those Africans in that small little island that you live on have proven to be some of the most extraordinary humans in the world in terms of their contribution. I could talk about Dr. Scobie, but I would really like you to keep me back for the political and economic discussion. But the man, Scobie, was the deputy director of the most powerful Black Studies department in the United States of America, led by Dr. Leonard Jeffries. He was Dr. Jeffries' deputy. And together they ran that department with more. We were the largest. City University is 19 campuses. And we had almost 3,000. Am I getting it right, Dr. Jeffries?
Yes.
300,000. At City College alone, we had 2,500 students, you know, when I enrolled there. But when you add the 19 colleges, you have tens of thousands of students. And this one at City was one of the largest departments, whether it was economics or history or any, in the Northeast, if not the country. And it was led by Edward Scobie and Leonard Jeffries. And so I'd like Dr. Jeffries to really introduce you to Dr. Scobie. I could always greet my little babies. They come by and look and say hello. Now go.
Hi, how are you doing? Excellent.
So I think if we would bring Dr. Jeffries in and let him introduce the Dr. Scobie that he worked with, and then I can come back and talk about the aspect of Dr. Scobie as my professor. He will talk about Dr. Scobie as the historian, as the writer, as the administrator, as the political leader, because under the leadership of these two brothers, we carried out some of the largest student takeover of university systems in the country. At one point, we closed down, I think it was 19 campuses. And it was only open because Dr. Scobie and I went in and negotiated with these hundreds of thousands of students to give the school back to the administrators. So he was an extraordinary man, but the students loved and respected him at a level it was hard to imagine. When that man with that gray hair walked those halls, everybody gave him the respect too. So I think, Brother Christian, if you'd bring Dr. Jeffries in, and then we would go deeper into Dr. Scobie.
Thank you, Brother Smalls.
Yeah, thank you.
Brother G, would you like me to introduce him?
Well, here's what I would say. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Small for these brilliant introductory remarks. I also want to shout out Dr. Jeffries because he was a little bit getting here, but he's here now, and his presence obviously gracing us with. I'm very happy to have you, Dr. Jeffries. And Gabriel, I could say some things about Dr. J, but I feel that I do not know enough, and maybe my voice is not as strong as yours. You thought that the brief bio that you gave of Dr. Small was a mouthful. I suspect you're going to have a bigger mouthful when you introduce Dr. Jeffries. So let me let you introduce our esteemed Dr. Jeffries.
Thank you very much, Brother G. Thank you very much, Professor Smalls.
You're welcome.
Good evening again, Dr. Jeffries.
Yes.
I'm going to be as brief as I possibly and humanly can. Leonard Jeffries Jr. is a former university administrator, professor, and Pan-Africanist. Was born on January 19th, 1937 in Newark, New Jersey, to Leola Smith Jeffries of Lynchburg, Virginia, an office secretary, and Leonard Jeffries of Akron, Ohio, a tailor at Irvington Cleaners and Dryers. Reared in Newark's Roosevelt section, Jeffries attended Mount Sinai Baptist Church and McKinley Junior High School. He graduated from Barrington High School in 1955, whose alumni included Amiri Baraka, class of 51, Donald Payne, class of 52, and August Mayer, class of 40. For those who do not know, Amiri Baraka is a famous African-American poet, otherwise known prior by the name Leroy Jones.
Yes.
Jeffries was a government honors graduate at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, awarded a Rotary International Fellowship to attend Switzerland's University of Lausanne, 1959-61. Jeffries studied law at NYU and obtained a Columbia University MA in 1963. As a Rockefeller Foundation and Whitney Opportunity Fellow, Jeffries in 1972 earned the Columbia University PhD in political science under the direction of Elliot Skinner, Emmanuel Wallerstein, and Gray Cohen. Brother Jeffries, while a City College of New York instructor in 1969, joined with John Henry Clark to establish the African Heritage Studies Association, ASA, from 1969 to 1973. From 1973, Jeffries was chair of the Black Studies Department at San Jose State College in San Jose, California, where he promoted the idea that unlike traditional academic disciplines, Black studies was intimately related to the community. Thus, in 1971, Jeffries led protests against police following the killing of John Henry Smith, an African-American IBM research chemist. He vowed to be a thorn in the side of the powerful and called the court exoneration of Smith's murderers a judicial sham, a whitewash, a gross insult to the non-white community. In 1973, CCNY President Robert Marshak recruited Jeffries to return as a fully tenured professor and chair of the Black Studies Department, a post he held for 20 years, helping it to become one of the largest academic programs in the field nationally. Jeffries became oral history director of the Carnegie-funded Kinte Library for Black Genealogical Research in Washington, D.C. He also consulted on Alex Haley's Roots, a book on the African American experience under chattel slavery. I can go on and on, other than to say, at this point in time, Brother Jeffries is considered one of the leading Pan-Africanists ever to have walked this earth, and he worked closely with the Right Honorable and Blessed Dr. Edward Scobie. Dr. Jeffries, welcome to Q95. Welcome to your Dominican family, as we've welcomed Brother Smalls.
Welcome, Dr. Jeffries.
Well, certainly, brothers, I certainly have enjoyed this opportunity to try to grasp this enormous partner we've had in this Pan-African struggle. Professor Scobie, Edward Percival Scobie, was an extraordinary pillar of strength for us at City, because we had a lot of students coming from the various islands of the Caribbean, from various parts of the African American community, and from the continental Africa. And so we needed to have strength to pull these powerful forces together. So Professor Smalls took out a specialty of not only teaching in our department, but handling student activities. And then we needed Professor Scobie, because you needed someone who spoke directly from the roots in the Caribbean, because so many students and whatnot, they needed that process. I had a chance of coming out of the African American experience and bringing my knowledge and understanding, but I also had this unusual chance of traveling around the world and had an involvement in a program called Operation Crossroads Africa. My wife is here actually now. She just cleared space for us. She's a teacher, professor, a brilliant African specialist, and she actually began the African movement before any of us. She went to Africa in 1960 before I met her, and she went to Nigeria with this program called Operation Crossroads Africa. So Professor Scobie provided the ingredients of stability that we needed. He had this unusual experience of having been in World War II as an RAF pilot. And that itself was an enormous process for him, because it allowed him to be with those who were at the 5th Pan-African Conference. And that 5th Pan-African Conference is one of the most important post-World War II historical coming together of Black folk. In fact, I have here a book by a brother from South America, from Guyana, Ross McConnell. It's Pan-Africanism from Within. And he was with Professor Scobie and the other greats who were there in Manchester in 1945, mapping out a strategy of how to pull the shattered African world that was devastated by colonialism, and it was further devastated by the insanity of World War II that involved not only Hitler and other crazy human manifestations, but it involved the destruction of African foundation. Emperor Haile Selassie, for example, had to make a great speech to call on the world bodies to support Ethiopia from the Italian invaders. And so this consciousness of Pan-Africanism was very important. George Padmore, his great work was Pan-Africanism or communism. And he knew the important role he had to play, because he was one of the leading international members of the Communist Party. And in fact, he began to see, once the brothers from Nigeria and from Ghana and South Africa came together, that that the communist movement that he had been a leader of was not serving African interests. So they moved into collectively these young men and some women, because Marcus Garvey's wife was a part of the Fifth Pan-African Conference in Manchester. They began to link up with various important world actors. W.E.B. Du Bois, from the American scene, he was the elder of the conference, and he was the chair, a nominal chair. His assistant, his secretary, was Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and the whole host of others who prepared Ross McConnell had 2 or 3 restaurants. He was an entrepreneur. So he helped to fund and house and feed these hundreds of Black men and women who were trying to devise plans for the new Africa. And so to have Malcolm X as a part of our inspiration in New York, and to have his family and others relate to us. Professor Smalls had a very special relationship with him. But to have this brother from the Caribbean, who had this enormous reach, not only in terms of the academic work that we're talking about now, but he also had a link with literature, the Rousseau, the newspaper. I have a whole file of the issues of the newspaper coming out of Dominica. And then, of course, his work in terms of Black Britannia and the English. After the war, he also found a place in England, and that allowed him to be a linkage. To show how strong he was in terms of the link was when I had a chance to, Dr. Clark was my mentor, and he gave us orders. And one of his orders was that the great work of Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, one of the greatest of the African scholars, the great work of this brother was in French. He knew that I had a skill in French because I had studied there for 2 years in Lausanne. So he gave me my orders that I need to take a sabbatical leave and have his great work translated, because we can't wait 20 years for a translation. So I was able to go to Europe and get the translation done. But while in Europe, at the World Council of Churches, I really met an important foundation to Professor Scobie. And this brother was one of the leaders of the establishment in Dominica. And his name was Dr. Philip Potter. And Ed and Dr. Potter were friends. And so when I first met him and he was giving me my greetings, Dr. Potter, he said, do you know all of Ed's names? And so, of course, I just knew Edward Scobie. So he said, no, his full name is Edward Percival. Now, he had 3 or 4 names he strung together. And so that bonded him and myself, and I was able to do the research I needed to help the struggle in South Africa. So we produced the book, South Africa in Crisis. Now, while I was away, the leadership had to be passed on to Professor Scobie, and he was able to stand in not just as a deputy, but as someone who had a major role to play to keep things together. And the World Council of Churches was a significant body in terms of funneling aid to the struggles in, particularly in South Africa. And so I went there to try to translate Cheikh Anta Diop's book, and it was a difficult task. So I had a chance to tell Dr. Potter that the churches were not doing enough in South Africa in that struggle in Southern Africa, and they needed to have more assistance from the churches. And so Dr. Potter said, Dr. Jeffries, if you don't think the churches are doing enough in the struggle in South Africa, I'm going to put you in charge of the task force to deliver aid to South Africa. And that was an enormous responsibility, but I was glad to take it because translating Cheikh Anta Diop's book, because it's so much of the scientist speaking to the world of science, I was glad to put it on the shelf and get into the struggle in South Africa. And so Professor Scobie and myself continued to do the work together. For example, when they had a reparations conference, Professor Scobie was not only able to send his paper on reparations to the conference, but a famous speech I made about education, the so-called Albany speech, saying that the European world system is not treating and teaching African peoples correctly. So that speech, which was so significant, we had the lawsuits around it. An African from the Caribbean who was Scobie's partner, but he was very different from Scobie. And an African from the Caribbean, Dudley Thompson, instead of being a tall giant like Professor Scobie, he was a short one. But again, he was a dynamo. In other words, he was an RAF pilot. He also worked closely with the other leaders, for example, Jomo Kenyatta and Dudley Thompson. Dudley developed his legal skills and he used them to save the Mau Mau movement and Jomo Kenyatta. I have one of the books I was looking for. I have it in the back. It has on the picture, on the cover, from Kenya to
Kingston.
And that was, these brothers had a thing going. And so I was glad to be in the middle of all of it. Now, most people don't realize that this RAF pilot, Dudley Thompson, and I were born on the same day. It was Dudley, January 19th, 20 years apart. But he said to me, I'm going to adopt you. I'm your uncle. I'm going to work with you. In other words, this is the beautiful thing, that he saw my potential and he didn't hesitate to bond with me and to create a powerful togetherness. And what I was trying to say was that Dudley Thompson was in charge of he was in charge of the Pan-African Conference that they had on reparations. And that was produced by the president of Nigeria, Dr. Abiola. But who was in charge of the conference? Dudley Thompson. And so all these great scholars were able to put together, and leaders, to put together their statement on reparations and the need for them and what should be done. And what our brother Dudley did, he realized, my lawyer had said that we have a legal trial fighting for academic freedom, and that we cannot, you can't leave the country to go to the conference in Nigeria because the trial is too important. So I had to stay. And then Scobie also, he would have been a witness at the trial, so he could not go to the reparations conference. But Dudley Thompson took our papers, the Albany speech and Scobie's article on reparations, and they were put together as part of this international conference. That's the type of relationship and brotherhood and togetherness that has not been properly explained and needs to be dealt with. Kwame Ture.
But Dr. Jeffries, I mean, when I listen to you now talk about Edward Scobie, I mean, I don't know if you realize that, but most Dominicans know very little about Ed Scobie.
Okay.
Any Dominican that's maybe 40 years and younger, unless they've been reading, they know very little about Ed Scobie. So the information that you're giving us tonight is valuable. I know that we will have to take some calls, and
Yes.
I'm going to, because people will want to know more from you about some of these folks that we're talking about, especially knowing that you've rubbed shoulders. If so many of these elites, these people who are so knowledgeable and played such a leading role in Black African history. So, I mean, I really would like, I want you to continue a little bit, but I just wanted to let Lambi know that we will take the calls if they're coming in, Lambi. So if there's any calls coming in, please interrupt us, because we really want to give the people an opportunity to ask as many questions, because we're not going to have Dr. Jeffries and Dr. Small here every night. So now that we have them, if the people have questions, we'd like them to answer the questions. Gabriel, I know you were itching to say something while Dr. Jeffries was talking.
I thank you so much, Brother G. I actually found a photograph in front of the White House with Dudley Thompson, Royal Air Force Flight Lieutenant, Aldrich Cross from Trinidad, Thompson was from Jamaica, Royal Air Force, and of course my dad, Wendell Christian. In June of 2009, we brought them here for Operation Caribbean Glory. Tribute. So he was at the office. I've sent it to Dr. Smalls and Dr. Jeffries. I sent it to you too, Sheridan. And you know, it's interesting. Dr. Jeffries and myself and Smalls were at the same church for his funeral, but we didn't know each other. You know, we had Holy Trinity in Kingston in 2012. And Dr. Jeffries told me that he gave him his last ride. He actually passed away while riding with him in New York City. And they were at a conference. Up to age 94, thereabouts, Dr. Jeffries was with, I mean, up to age 94, Dudley Thompson was still working, even if he sometimes had to be relegated to a wheelchair. And so this is a message to our young people, to really plumb the depths of our history, to study our history, study our greats, so we can be possessed of that dignity and that courage to overcome the challenges that we face.
Yes, and as we say that, I want to go briefly back to Dr. Small, because Dr. Small, you know, you see, as Gabriel said this, I mean, we have to make the transition, because look, these forebears, they set so much for us in terms of work ethic, you know, generally ethics and spiritualism and theology and culture, in music, the arts, and so on. And as you can see, the Africans were the leaders in all of these areas there. I want you to let's talk a little bit more about it, because we have to go into how all of the politics and the economics and all of that developed, all the music. Let's talk to us about it, because I know that you're very, very well informed about many of those areas there.
Two things for the young people, the younger people.
And just as you go, can I ask Dr. Jeffries maybe to turn off his mic temporarily, and Gabriel as well, so we don't get feedback while Dr. Small is talking. All right, so thanks a lot, Dr. Small. Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. Just two other things should be mentioned for the young people about Dr. Scobie. There's so much, but that he was the mayor of the major city in Dominica. He was one of the founders of your ruling political party in Dominica. And all the things he did when he left Dominica out in the world that Dr. Jeffries was talking about, and that's just the drop in the bucket. And that's just one man from Dominica. We had also Bill Revere, who I heard passed in November, working on the staff of Dr. Jeffries and Dr. Scobie, another Dominican at City College. When I talk about the power of Dominica, the young people need to see and study these people, because these were your models, and they were great models. And I know this is carnival time right about now, yes? And my cousin, who's on her way from Ghana tomorrow, so she couldn't get on with us tonight because she's traveling from one area to the other, but she's studying at Columbia University, the retention of Africanism in Caribbean dance, music, and carnival. And one of the places she spent most of her time studying and filming is in Dominica. And so I asked her, could I use your name? Because I know somebody will know you, because she's in and out of taxis, staying at guest houses months at a time. And her name is Olabayo, you know, and everybody knows Olabayo. And everybody took care of her down in Dominica while she was there. But in studying our dance and our music, you know, a lot of people say, oh, we lost our culture when they took us from Africa. Oh, we lost everything, but we didn't. When you look at Carnival and you watch those dance steps and those body movements, take photographs of them, take videos of them, and you can go back to Africa among the Ewe people, the Yoruba people, the Akan people, and so forth, and you will see the same dance you're doing in Carnival. You just dress differently from where they were dressed back then, but the foot movements are the same. The arm movements are the same. And the drum rhythm, those drum rhythms that you're playing that you think just came out of the blue, no, they came from Africa in your heads. And you retain that history in the drum. And a lot of those rhythms is telling the story about our experiences. Even when you look at musicology and you're talking about the type of music and where it came from, you know the difference between African music and other musics because we come with something called polyrhythm. So if you see a young lady dancing, her hands swaying one way, the left hand, the right hand's going another way, the feet's going another way, and she's doing these 4 things at a time, and we just say, oh, that's just Black people, that's just African rhythm. No, in music, that's called polyrhythm. No other culture does that, except Africa. Other culture must do 1, and then 2, and then 3, then 4. We do 1, 2, 3, 4 at one time. So that's the music that became calypso. That's the music that eventually evolved into reggae. It is those beats that came from Africa that give you those different levels of rhythmic expression, and especially in the dances we see at Carnival. Not just the dances, but the type of costume. Where did that costume come from? When you look at the costumes, you'll see that those are like what we call almost hieroglyphs. But instead of being written on the wall, it is a clothing design or a hair design. So you will see, if you look at one dancers, you will see all of the implements of a Shango, the great king, with all of his colors and feathers and mostly dominated by red. Or you'll see the Yoruba goddess Oshun, which is dominated by yellow feathers and certain kind of arrangement, and her dance is always kind of sensual. Or you'll see the Ogun. He's always carrying either a sword or a hammer, and he's usually green and black, and he's the tough guy. And those are the spirits you brought from Africa, and you saved it in your carnival. They didn't have no carnival in Europe. Nobody in Europe did carnival. You'll only find these celebrations in Africa. And in Ghana, it may be called the Odrira Festival. And Ashanti, it may have another name for the festival. But these are the festivals that begins the beginning of the New Year's. You know, harvesting is over. We've eaten well. We are celebrating, you know, the great harvest. We are celebrating it. And you're praising God with your dancing. You're praising God with the colors. You're praising God with your drumming. And you can close your eyes and listen to that festival in Dominica and go to Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and close your eyes if you're from Dominica and not realize you're not still in Dominica. Because it's in the music. The message is in the music. The message is in the dance. The message is in the retention of drum rhythms. But not only that, there's folklores, stories that go with each of those dances. You know, we learn about the different folklore and what this one did. There was one folklore that I like, and it's about the farmer, and it's a Nigerian folklore. And this farmer is he's I forgot the name of the Odu, Obara. And this farmer, he is like in the woods and he's farming his farm. And then there's this man, he's a hunter. He decided, I want to get rich. So he goes and said, I'm going to look for the god of the forest. and tell him, I need wealth. Give me gold, give me something. So he goes into the forest and he tells God, I know this is you who have come to me. So make me rich so I don't have to work so hard. This is the hunter man. But the farmer, he's steady planting his ground. So God gave him a bag all tied up and says, here is your wealth. And he goes home and he's so happy, he thought he had gold or silver. He gets home, he opened the bag and there's nothing but seeds. So he said, what kind of thing is this? God just play a trick on me. Give me some seed. What's the seed for? And so he says, I don't want no seed. I want wealth. So he goes and he gives the seed to the farmer and says, hey, you plant all the time. You take the seeds. And the next season, the farmer planted the seeds and become the wealthiest man in the county because God had given him some special pumpkin seeds. So he had the richest pumpkin farm in the country. So now the other man is mad. He goes back in the woods. He's looking for God again. How come you didn't tell me the pumpkin seeds? But he said, you asked for wealth. I gave you wealth. You have no respect for the type of wealth I gave you.
Mm-hmm.
So all through our cultures in the Caribbean and in Dominica as well, these little folk stories are there, telling us about our principles, telling us about building character. But we don't pay attention to it because we don't know where it came from. So study your history and you'll get rid of the other people's mystery. And you see your ancestors clearly teaching and instructing you with every pan beat, every drum beat, every rhythm dance, every color you made your costume out of it means something. And you brought all of that from Africa, but you couldn't let them see what you brought. So you disguise it in your new culture, but you remember the disguise. But what has happened now, because we haven't been telling our history, our people don't remember why we created the disguise.
But are we Dr. Small? Are we maybe the new generations? Are we losing some of that? Because if we look in the region now, we see the Trinidad Carnival is totally different from ours in Dominica in terms of the costumes and the way they do their mass. But the point is, a lot of that is being imported into Dominica now.
Mm-hmm.
So you see less of those costumes and the traditional bands and more of the Trinidad type, Trinidad type of band. And then, of course, when you talk about the morals and the ethics and the principles and so on, I mean, are we losing some of that as well? Because we see our new generations are changing. It's not like, I mean, are we really? Because even we see, for example, some of our political leaders, but we see what is going on in the region is not dissimilar to what happens in some of the African countries, right? I mean, we hear, for example, of the Mandarin being taught in a school in Africa as a language, and yet some of the African languages may not be taught there. We look in our region, in the home of our great Marcus Garvey in Jamaica, you might see a predominance of the Chinese people there. They've more or less taken over. I mean, even in all the islands as well, we see that happening. I mean, what do you think?
Well, one of the key things is, Marcus Garvey taught us this, Elijah Muhammad, all of our great leaders taught us you must know yourself. You must know your history. We are not insisting on having our children learn our history. In the Caribbean and Africa and the United States, we're still getting either colonial curricula or slave curricula. Those curricula was designed for us not to compete in the world's marketplace, but to be laborers for the competitors. And so until we return, until we can talk about Dominica and talk about, yes, there's a deep Christian tradition there. But if you go into a white church in Dominica or a white church in England, say the Methodist Church or the Anglican Church, then you come to one in Dominica, it's two different churches. What is the difference? One is an African church and one is a European church. But if you don't have that discussion with the child, you don't say, let's look at what's in our church that's not in their church. And look at what's in their church that's not in our church. And you see the difference in culture. And you see you didn't lose everything. You see that you simply hid them here and use them here and start exposing our history to our children. So psychologically, you grow from what you know. And if you only know the way of the enemy, which is a way of suppressing your being, then that's what your life will be doing, suppressing yourself, suppressing your people, suppressing your culture. But if you know the way of your ancestors, you know that history, which is such an extraordinary history, because you didn't get defeated in Dominica. The Europeans had to pack up and leave. You won the war. You still have some victories to tie up, but virtually you won. But people make you think you lost. Now, how do you change that paradigm in the discussion, right? You must know the history and the details of that history. The children must know when they say I'm Dominican, it ain't just I'm a place you come to vacation and be a tourist. And when you say I'm a Dominican, you're saying I have a particular spirit. I have a particular culture. I have a particular character, and its roots are in Africa. But you must know your history.
Dr. Jeffries, I hope you could just turn on your mic, because your mic may be off. But I would really like to hear your thoughts on some of those as well, because it seems to me there's this transition that has taken place. And even when we look at some of our political leaders in the region, it appears that they've gone through some kind of transition. And I really would like to get your thoughts on some of that as well.
Well, clearly, we can't expect our enemies or people who are reared against us to give us the victory. We have to work through the difficulties of exploitation. And our great contribution of our generations has been fighting to put in place a process of Africanizing. It's hard for me to even say it any clearer. Most of us are put in place to be Europeanized. And now with the modern technology and all of the youngsters can be seduced with all of this modern technology. So we have to be consciously involved in the process of Africanizing. And so I was fortunate growing up in the city of Newark, New Jersey, to have a socialization, how you get your values, your role models, your patterns of behavior, how you become who and what you are. And so that has to be a constant plan. That's part of our socialization. We're allowing other people to socialize our youth and our young adults. And we have to reclaim that. That's why I was so glad that I was supposed to become the lawyer to save the race. But once this African studies and these other avenues were there, I became glad that I was able to get that process in place. Charles, see whether you have the Egypt thing as I did as a youngster here. But Brother Smalls has devoted his adult life in getting heavy into the culture. And so when we go to Africa, we bond with the people. And so that was one of the great things that Professor Scobie wanted us to help him become part of that. And when I'm talking about socialization, as a 10-year-old youngster, this is what I was able to produce in grammar school. In other words, this is the pyramids of Egypt. This is my design, copying it from the Funk and Wagnall encyclopedias. So I used to have a thing where I say, "Where's the funk?" I told my students, I'm going to put a chapter on "Where's the funk?" Dr. Jeffries, why are you trying to be so cool all the time? I said, no, I'm talking about the Funk and Wagnall encyclopedia. Now, this was my design as a young 10, 12-year-old. And the paper, the work in it, a 21-page paper analyzing the Nile, the overflow and whatnot. So that's why I said that my mother and the community around me took us youngsters and began to give us the foundation that we needed. Now, this got me a C. Here's a 21-page handwritten analysis copied from the encyclopedia. Then my next paper was on Mesopotamia. And so I did the same thing, using my artist skills and put together a nice paper. I got a B on that. And then when it came to Greece, here's the same process. Out of the Funkin' Encyclopedia, I got an A. But it was clear that the teacher saw this young Black youngster, and she did not think he had the creativity or the ability to rise. But once she saw it consistently, they had to begin to open up the doors for us. But our families had the organizations, and they had the sending us away to camp and giving us a sense of purpose and direction. My father's father was murdered by the Klan. So that became a motivation for our people to fight. The organizations they had in rural Georgia and Virginia, both sides of the family, they were Masons, they were Eastern Star, they were farmers, they built their own schools, they processed their own crops, etc. And so we have to learn that there's an economic, political, and cultural dimension that we have to make a part of our teaching process. And one of the works that I did, and well, a young fellow did this. This is one of our students. Well, he wasn't even our student. He went to the internet and was able to pull off of the internet the material to produce this book on Dr. Jeffries, My Life, My Story. And he's using the pyramid as I used it: economics, politics, and culture, mind, body, and spirit, female, male, and the youth. So this is an example of what someone can do, inspired by the work of others. And so we're going to make, since he got all of this off of the internet, we're going to be able to talk to him to make copies of it. And inside, he has a picture of my growing up, my development. He has pictures of me with the Nigerian leaders. He has a picture of me with Percy Sutton, me with Alex Haley. Professor Scobie had a chance to work with me on the Alex Haley project. And we got a $500,000 grant to put the support with Alex Haley. So I'm saying that, yes, we have a problem. The problem is the transmission of knowledge. And you just can't send your child to a school and think that they're going to get the knowledge, and you're not monitoring it, and you're not growing yourself. And so this particular volume that the brother has includes me being installed in Ghana, in two different places, Agogo and Elmina. My wife and I with Alex Haley at the village of Jufere, where Alex had his family connection. And so hands-on is required, but we have to continue to grow, and so that we might be able to step up. Scobie had one of his great books was Black Britannia, A History of Blacks in Britain. This is his seminal piece. But of course, African Global Presence, and here's another one of his books. So as we teach our young people, our youngsters, our teenagers, we need to get into the knowledge ourselves. Now that Scobie's partners, Ivan Van Sertima, Jan Carew, they formed a collectivity to support each other. And then Kwame Ture, our brother from the Caribbean, who got into the struggle in the South, and Michael Thurwell, his partner, and him produced a monumental work, Ready for the Revolution. And this brother, and one of our real treasures, coming up from the South, just like Dr. John Henry Clark, coming out of Alabama, Georgia, he came out of Mississippi, and he did not get education in the public school system. There was no decent public school system, but his family and the community and the churches gave him a start. And once he got moving out of Mississippi, he went up to Morehouse and got his first degree in Morehouse. And then he came up into the North and got his degree in psychology.
But you see, Dr. Jeffries, all of what you're saying is so inspiring. I mean, Gabriel, when you think about it, Dr. Jeffries spoke about the whole question of the family structure. And I know that Dr. Smalls wants to add to that. But I mean, he spoke about the family structure. He spoke about the transmission of knowledge. You know, and Dr. Smalls really talked about the culture and the politics and the economics. And he talked about the pyramid made up of the economics, the politics, and the culture. As a younger fella than us, Gabriel, I'd be interested in getting your perspective on all of that, because we see what is happening now, you know, in the modern day Caribbean, in Dominica, what is going on. How do you see this right now? Your mic needs to be turned on, Gabriel. I think your mic is off, yeah?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. G. Thank you, Brother Jeffries,
Yes.
for again expanding the circumference of our knowledge. As a child, I remembered Mayor Scobie. I was maybe about 6, 7 years old. He was on the platform at Lagon, which is the trade union hall, speaking. That's the only time I saw him. And when Irvin Andre and I put out the first book on Dominica by our generation, that is after Lennox's Dominica story, I called him in New York and we spoke, and we were supposed to have met, but we did not. So here we have two outstanding brothers, Dr. Smalls and Dr. Jeffries, telling us about our own Edward Scobie. One thing I need to do is remind our listeners that he was an intellectual ally of Premier Edward Oliver LeBlanc. Mm-hmm. And he edited Dies Dominica, which was a collection of poetry, essays, and short stories in 1965. And I think I've sent a copy to Brother Smalls. If I haven't, I will send a copy to you, Brother Jeffries, as well as Brother Sheridan. And the reason I'm saying this is important for our listening audience, and I'll try to make that magazine, which has been scanned, available to a wider Dominican and Dominican diaspora audiences. We need to study. We need to be keenly engaged in the education mission. Both of these brothers did not just fall out from heaven and start spewing stuff. They had to apply themselves meticulously to the process of acquiring knowledge, packaging that knowledge, and then using that knowledge to lift up the downtrodden. And I want to just take a moment to thank you and to salute both of you, and to ask Dominicans at home and abroad and others, or Afro-Kalinago people, to understand the importance of heritage protection. Today in Roseau, a lot of our heritage has been lost. A lot of the houses that were houses occupied by notable Dominicans that reflected our Creole, Afro-Caribbean architecture has been destroyed, and the land being occupied or usurped by unknown buyers. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand there's a direct correlationship between spiritual identification and the victory that one attains in the material world. It's not any two, I like the term that Brother Smalls is polyrhythmic. Mm-hmm. Polyrhythmic. That's understanding that we have to be able to do several things at the same time. Educate ourselves, take action, cleanse our spirit, and liberate our people.
Thanks a lot, Gabriel. As I go back to Dr. Smalls, I mean, could you just maybe turn off your mic, Dr. Jeffries, while I go to Dr. Smalls, because I believe if your mic is open, we will get a little feedback. So thanks a lot for that. Dr. Smalls, I mean, really, there's so much. I want to go back to you because I know that you have a lot more you can add to all of this. I know people really want to learn a lot more. And I want to just remind Lambi on the console that if he has a call, please just make me a sign and we can take. But I know people may want to make some calls to get some more, to get a little bit more involved in the conversation. So let's maybe take a call before I go to you, Dr. Smalls, because I think somebody wants to interact with us.
We have someone on the overseas line. Could you make a call now? Go ahead, please. The Global View and Q.
Yes. Good evening, Dr. G, Brother G, Mr. G. Good evening, Lambi. Good evening, Dr. Paul, and good evening, Dr. Jeffrey. I just want to say to these two gentlemen, Dr. Small and Mr. Jeffries, an honor to have you all on a radio station in Dominica. And I hope a lot of young people are listening right now, because there's no coincidence that you all are on the station this day today, because everything always go full circle. And listening to you all, what you have been saying about the past, there's as one of the speakers said in the past, we are not different from the past. We are all extension of the past. So the greatness that the past did, we in this day and time can do greater. So I just want to appreciate you all, and I never get the opportunity to meet any one of you all because I live in New York. I know I'm always on 125th, but I had the privilege of meeting, before he passed away, Dr. Khalid Mohammed, and I'm a student of Dr. Malachi Z. York. So I know much about you all through books and circles with my boys on 125th about you all and the things, the contribution you all did and I still doing towards the upliftment of the black race. So I appreciate you all guys, you all gentlemen, and I hope just a lot of young people are listening to take note on what you all are saying, because you are bringing us right back to what was happening, and hopefully we could make a change going into the future, because we need those information from you all so we could go forward. I appreciate you all, and I'm listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lambi. If you don't have another call, I'll just go over to Dr. Small. Dr. Small, let me go over to you.
Yes, sir. I just want to come in on, we'll say, lamb back, not piggyback on what Dr. Jeffries was saying, because he likes to say, no, we don't want to piggyback. We want that. And I know folks don't like to say, but I'm a Freemason. And a lot of times the young people say, well, how are you going to be a Freemason and a radical and a Pan-Africanist and this? Most of our great leaders were Freemasons. Okay. Most of our great leaders were Oddfellows. Most of our great leaders were Knights of Pythias. And we still have these institutions. Those were the institutions that saved us after slavery and colonialism. But we don't use them anymore like we used to. We join them now for prestige's sake. But we don't use them to teach and guide our young people, mentor them, and rites of passage them into manhood and womanhood. The Eastern Star, the Daughters of Ruth, the Daughters of Isis. And so I think, and I know a lot of these institutions are in the Caribbean still. And so we need to sit down and say, what tools do we have to do the socialization of our children that Dr. Jeffries is talking about? And maybe we've gone to sleep on the tools. And we need to wake up.
Dr. Small, I hate to interrupt you, but you can see some people really want to engage with you. Lambi, yes, I really want them to engage you because they really don't know enough and they want more. Lambi, let me go over to you. Just a moment.
Someone on the overseas line, please make your call now. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening, Lambi.
Good evening.
And I would like to say good evening to Sheridan and Gabriel and most of us, to the great scholars, Dr. Small and Dr. Jeffries. I would like to thank them two scholars there immensely. But Sheridan, I must say thank you to you and Gabriel for bringing this format to the people, because I've heard these men live and direct, face to face, because I used to be at the lectures back in the early 90s, and for many years I've followed these gentlemen, and they have given me a guide into my Africanness. When I came to the United States in the early 80s, there were a lot of lectures in the Washington, D.C. area, and every time there was one, I would attend. And Dr. Jeffries was one of my favorites. He was always there, hitting hard. And today, I could sit down and listen and reminisce. And for all the scholars he has called who came along his time, I saw them and listened to them, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Ben Yakanan, and all. But most of all, I just wanted to call and say thanks for being there, to compliment them. And when Dr. Small mentioned the African contribution on the global level, I had a discussion with a Greek one time, and he tried to the African contribution. And when I told him that the Greeks were educated by the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, like Dr. Small said, he never spoke to me again. He got angry. And I said, hey, brother, we having a discussion. And we talking about history and we dealing in fact, not fiction. That gentleman worked with me. He never spoke to me another day in his life. And I remember that as today. And this is where I'm coming from because of my teaching from them teachers there that you have tonight. I was able to stand in my Africanness and defend myself. So I want to say big up to them brothers. And this is where I first met Edward Scobie too, in Washington, D.C. at Howard University. Thank you, gentlemen.
And your name is Marcus Rossi, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. So you see, Dr. Smalls, that's what I'm talking about. People want to engage,
Yes. And that forum that Marcus was talking about was called the First World Alliance in New York. And I think the conference in Washington was the African Heritage Studies Association conference, Dr. Jeffries. Because I remember Dr. Scobie was there, you were there. And so, again, I wanted to say something to the young people. When I was young, I was very powerful. I beat the church up. Matter of fact, I beat the church down. But I realized that was a mistake today. It was a mistake because that institution was the only sanctuary we could use because the European blocked us from doing anything African. So the church was our sanctuary. And we put Africa in the church, but we've forgotten what we put there. So you got to study the history so you can recognize what's in the mirror by looking back in the past. And even as I've studied through the years, one would think, the Catholic Church, as we were taught, started everything. Then Martin Luther had his epiphany, and he left the church and he founded the Lutheran Church, and then out of that became the Baptist Church and Methodist Church and so forth, and the Church of England. But that's not the historical truth, because the church in Ethiopia and the church in Sudan and the church in Egypt is 500 years older than the Catholic Church and 1,000 years older than Luther's Reformation. Let me go back and say something to Black kids again so you can see what I missed when I was young. And I'm trying to show you now, and I've learned this from really studying, listening to Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, Dr. Jeffries' wife, who's an art historian, a spiritual historian, a historian on all of the levels, that if the church in Ethiopia, the church in Black Egypt at the time, the church in the Sudan is at least 500 years older than the Catholic Church, out of which comes 500 years later, the Protestant movement under Luther's Reformation, which means the African church is 1,000 years older than the Protestant churches. So when we're talking about history, we got to erase the mystery. Dr. Nobles taught me that. Erase the mystery with your history. And then you'll be able to find the gold and the diamonds and the silver that our ancestors left in knowledge in these churches. And the Masons, yes, we look good in our Black, and we have in our communication to be sharp, but we forgot to lead. We're supposed to, someone says, why do you want to come into this august fraternal body? Says, I want to make a good man better. But we seem to have forgotten that we do this thing to make the good man better. And my brothers, y'all know who I am because I've spoken in the lodges all over the place, and you've seen my video. It's called Freemasonry, Africa's Black Child, because it doesn't come out of England. It comes right up out of Africa, via Egypt, via the Knights Templars, into France, into England, into the rest of the world. So study history and claim your tradition and use the beauty and the power and the strength of that tradition to build your new world. You don't have to run around away from Dominica when you get your degree out of high school to look for work. If you make a decision, we're going to build the Dominica we want to live in. We're going to build the Dominica we want to see. We're going to build the Dominica we want our grandchildren to see. but that has to be deliberate, and we have to be determined. I just wanted to say that because Dr. Jeffries was talking about the socialization process. And I think we have the institutions in place. We just have to get in there and begin the process of socializing our youth. And it doesn't matter what else come after them, they'll walk in the path we want them to.
And that was so very well said as well. And Gebu, I know you want to add something to that, looking at the modern day situation, what we have happening now in Dominican, in our region. I'm sure you want to add something to that and make sort of the comparison in terms of what we have now. Your mic needs to be turned on, Gabriel.
Thank you, Brother Sheridan. What we have now
Gabriel, just before you go, can we take a call from Lambi?
Sure.
Lambi, let's take a call, Lambi.
Yes.
Good evening,
Good
caller.
evening.
Please go ahead.
Even before the gentleman said that he was a member of the secret society, I had an idea. So, because I realized all these people talking about Africa and we're Africans, and we fail to realize that we are children of Israel, or Israel is part of the continent of Ethiopia. But I would like to say here, I don't know if they agree or not, that the Negro people in America, in Caribbean, we are not Africans. We are actually children of Jacob, right? And these people keep telling us, Africa, Africa. Africans are the ones, Africans are children of Ham. Negroes are not children of Ham. Negroes are children of Jacob. We are children of Shem. That is the progenitor of Negroes. So we continue to confuse our people, and we can come out from the struggle. Thank you.
Okay. Let me respond. I think that deserves a response.
Yes.
First of all, I'm not in a secret society because I just told you the society I'm in. So we're not a secret. Dr. Jeffries told me we are a society of secrets. We have some things we don't want our enemies to know, but we do want our children to know. But no, if Israel is the beginning of things, then who are the Egyptians they claim enslaved them? Were they mythical men from outer space? No. Israel is just the child of Africa. The word Africa comes from Africa. The word comes from North Africa, from the family called the Afri. The Romans, when they conquered, they said they were going to Afrika. Ka in the ancient Roman language is the acronym for land. We're going to Afri land, where the Marush, the blacks, live. The Marush is the Greek word for black, which gets anglicized as Moors. Let's get it right. Study the history, will erase the mystery. The Israelites, the Hebrew Israelites, is just one of Africa's children, and they're not the first of Africa's children. That's why it's important we study African history, because you will understand the mystery. If I just take your book, and I'll be short with this, when Abraham leaves Iraq and comes because he's running from somebody's chasing him, and he runs to Africa, a place the Greeks call Egypt, which the Africans call Kemet, the land of the blacks. And he goes there. Pharaoh must obviously know God, because Abraham in his cowardism gave his wife to the Pharaoh because he was scared. But when the Pharaoh goes to sleep, he have a dream and angels come to him. And God come to him and said, that woman is married. And he called a meeting with Abraham early the next morning. He said, how dare you? How dare you give me, trying to cause me to commit a sin against God? So it means the Egyptian Pharaoh already know about God. He wasn't waiting to be taught about God. And he not only gave the man his wife back without abusing him, but he gave him wealth because they were poor and hungry and on the run. So when we get history, let's get history straight. The oldest book you were going to read on religion is 30,000 years older than the Torah or the Bible. It's called the Pyramid Text. And I'm sure there's books older than that. And I can even recite you the Genesis story from the Pyramid Text, tens of thousands of years older than the Torah. This is a black book. And it goes something like this. And God says, I create myself out of myself. I cause existence to exist so that existing might exist. And when I realized that I existed, ma'at, truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, and reciprocity, and the pose of a woman was at my side. And then I created air, and I created moisture, and I created earth, and I created cosmology, and they created man and woman, a Asar and a Set, long before Adam and Eve. So see, if you know your history and know your story, you can see how others copied your story to create their story.
Yes.
History erases the mystery.
Yes. Now, Gabriel, I'm going back to you. Then I want to go back to Dr. Jeffries. But I just want to let Lambi know if you have any calls, we'll take it now. Otherwise, I'll just go right ahead to Gabriel so you can say what you wanted to say, Gabriel, and then I'll go over to Dr. Jeffries.
Thank you. I just want to thank the callers. I mean, people are listening. I've gotten several texts and folks are applauding this evening's program. And I just want to say that it is not enough to wear a dashiki, as some people do, and talk about reparations. We must do more than that. We must build organization. We must support businesses in our community. We must make sure that the political class that we have reflects respect for Africa, Kalinago people. If we do not demand that of our leadership, and we allow them to pimp the poverty of the masses for their own personal aggrandizement, to build palaces on a hill, then we will rule the day. So there must be a connectivity between the philosophy of Pan-Africanism and respect. Some connectivity between the philosophy of African liberation and ownership of the means of production. It will not serve us well if we have a dashiki and we talk about reparations, what Europe did. And we have wealth right now. We have political power right now. We have state power and access right now. And what do we do with it? We sell it for a mess of pottage. So there must be that connection between that which we think and that which we do. Anything short of that is plain out simple hypocrisy. So tonight is a night of unmasking the greatness of our people. Again, Dr. Smalls, when he said to me, you come from a small island, but it's a small but tough island, I felt mighty proud that we had made some contribution to the onward march of civilization. And no, civilization did not begin in Europe. That is part of the mystery that we've eradicated this evening. We come from greatness, and if we come from greatness, we must manifest that greatness in the way we love each other, the kindness that we exhibit, and the honesty in operational art. We must always be honest with the people and not mislead them. That is what I think is the most important value of this immensely informative discussion here with our two learned brothers.
Yes, and Dr. Jeffries, I don't know if your mic is on, but it might be good to turn on your mic if it's off, because we really want to hear every word that you have to say, because I know that there's a lot more that you want to give us tonight from your experience, just your knowledge and your experience, and the people that you've known, that you've worked with. You've seen their works, you've seen their knowledge, their experience, you learn from some of them. Many of us are learning from you tonight. So let me hand the mic over to you, Dr. Jeffries.
Well, brother, certainly I'm learning. I'm always learning, and I'm always teaching. And when the brother called and he had mentioned that he had some foundation coming out of organizations that are teaching and trying to Africanize our minds and our hearts and our bodies. And he had mentioned Dr. Malachi York. And again, because of my special circumstances, the history is that my family comes out of the deep roots in the red clay of Georgia on my father's side. And there are generations of us that have been building there and building their schools. There's a school on the hill that they built to send their children. Their big farms and are still there. And 8 miles away, Dr. Malachi York found the land that he used to build his center. In other words, it was in my grandfather's territory that he was able to build Egypt in the east. In other words, replicating the pyramids and the symbols and whatnot. And Brother Smalls also knows that some of our students from New York went down and joined Dr. Malachi York. And one of our brothers who's like a young son, a dynamo, Brother Taki, he also had a part of his foundation was with the Tamari, the learning of the ancients of the Nile. So we never know when we are going to connect and how that connection is going to work. A brother from England, Brother Papakai, he actually had a chance to go to my grandfather's tomb. The tallest tombstone in the graveyard is his, and it's a Tekken. It's the so-called obelisk, the George Washington Monument, and his basic statistics was there. But what was more important, it was the tallest tombstone in the graveyard. And it was his particular blessing that passed on to us. Even though we lost him, we didn't lose what he had given the family. So I was glad that the brother had mentioned Brother Papakai set up he had a publishing house and whatnot. So here he was coming from England to interact with us and then taking it back to England. We're a family. You can try to deny the family relationships, but we're an African family and we need to appreciate it because that's our strength. In that same area, Georgia, Alex Haley, who was born and raised in Tennessee, but he had this desire to connect with Africa. And Alex Haley was able to film a lot of the phenomena of roots in Georgia, in Brunswick, Georgia. And fortunately, I had a chance to work with him. He came to me for help, and also Professor Scobie and I helped him. And we were part of what they call the $500,000 grant we got from the Carnegie Corporation to help pull these materials and whatnot together. Socialization is the key. Africanization is the objective. We're on a sacred mission to put in place power and meaning for our people. So I want to thank you for allowing us to make this this statement. And one of our great brothers who came out of the red clay of Georgia and also Alabama is Dr. John Henry Clark, self-taught. He didn't have the degrees. When he went to school, the schools were not open for Black folk, but he was able to become a master teacher of us. And his great work is Notes for an African World Revolution, Africans at the Crossroads. And then you have Lumumba and Garvey and Malcolm and all of these great brothers who tried to throw off that yoke of whiteness and get us into this.
So Dr. Jeffries, do you mind if I take another call? Because you can see as you're talking, people want to interact, and I hate to have to.
No, you're doing what you're doing. Definitely.
Lambi, go right ahead.
On the overseas line, the caller, please go ahead.
Yes. Good evening, Lambi. Good evening, Brother Jeffries. Brother Jeffries, listening to you tonight brought me back a memory. City College, you and Brother Smalls, me, a Dominican, and we get into and seeing a shrine of Brother Scobie from my homeland in that tri kind of office that you guys shared as a department. And that conversation we had that afternoon, to see the sort of reverence that you held and you guys held, Brother Scobie, and I just listened tonight. I'm not sure what the program is, but then I heard that voice. I just took me back all the way to 1990, and when that whole destruction of the department came about because of Jewish reaction to historical writings. It's really happy to hear your voice tonight, brother. God bless.
Okay, thank you much.
Bless as well. Yes.
I think that's Brother Zed. So respect to Brother Zed.
Yes, I'm sure I recognize the voice of Brother Zed there. So Dr. Jeffries, you can see that whatever we're doing here tonight is invoking some memories from some people, and certainly a lot of interest is in developing what we're talking about. I know that Dr. Smalls, this gentleman, he raised some objections to some of the things you said, but I'm glad that you explained what you explained the way you did. I wish you would call back, in fact, to indicate whether he saw any merit in the explanation that you gave him, because obviously he had one perspective. It might be interesting to know whether any of the explanations that you gave him, he finds merit in them. So I certainly hope that he would call back if he has a moment. We don't have too much more time for the show. But Dr. Smalls, anything else you'd like to say to that gentleman?
Yes, sir. Is that we have to read beyond what the Europeans have given us access to. So when you talk about Jesus, the Christ, which is the center of Christianity, and I just showed you that Christianity emerged in Africa before it emerged into the European land under the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. So study what I said. Study the Ethiopian Church. Study the church in the Sudan. It's not with the computer now. You can find all these things, and then you will see. Go back into ancient Egypt, thousands and thousands of years before Christianity, and you'll already see the Madonna and Child.
Yes.
Don't deny the truth.
Dr. Smalls, I suspect we may have that caller might be back on the line. Let's see if it is him. Let's take a call and see if it's that same caller. Yeah.
On the overseas line, the caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, Lambi, this is the trucker. The reason why I choose to call back because one of the gentlemen said something about he being a Freemason, and being in Dominica as a little boy, we used to hear a lot of negative things about Freemason, about evil and those things like that, because we didn't know. But through my travels in New York, being a part of following the teachings of Dr. Malachi York, I am one of those. I did that travel. I walked that path. And to this day, I strongly hold it close to my heart because knowledge is very powerful. Because like he said, our ancestors, they always had the fraternal order where things were said from mouth to ears. And to this day, we have to uphold that. So educating the next generation about that is very important. And I hold this and I'll go to my grave with that, about walking that path as a Freemason. I hope, because knowledge is power, and they enlighten me, our ancestors, it's sovereign to us. Because if you look at on the walls of Egypt, all the gods that were standing with the left foot forward, that says something. So those that want to research it, it's sovereign to us, the Freemason. Don't worry about individuals saying it's evil now, because they want you to stay away from it. This is our culture. So I appreciate what you said, Doctor. That's why I decided to come through with that, because I'm walking that path, and I'm thankful for that. I'm listening.
Okay. I would like to say people can go and look at Sanetta TV. I have a 2-hour lecture on Freemasonry, Africa's Black Child. And I bring the history from the beginning of time as close as we can get, because nobody knows the beginning until today. And you will see that we are not on a wrong path. We simply have to stop being lazy. We had so many victories in the lodge that we got lazy. But our children need us more now than they needed us right after slavery. They needed us more now than they needed us right after colonialism, because right after colonialism, the spirit was so high, everybody was joying. But then things got subtle and we had to deal with the mechanics. Now more than ever, we need the knowledge and the rites of passage and the tutoring of our children to take place from these sacred spaces. We need to know the history, so it erases the mystery. How many people knew until I told them tonight the Ethiopian church was older than the Catholic Church? Most people have never heard it because they've never studied it. So don't just listen to me now. Go do your research. And you say, hey, the boy was telling the truth. How much more truth you don't know? And learning the history erases the mystery, And come back to what Brother Christian was saying, our setup. But Dr. Jeffries told us we must master the understanding of the needs of the people, which is food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security. But we can only supply that if we take full control of economic, politics, and culture in the lands we live in, and be in charge of land, labor, and resources in those spaces. Those are our goals. To reach those goals, we've got to appropriately socialize our children, which Dr. Jeffries also was saying, and we must socialize them to learn the technology of the day, but bring the wisdom of yesterday, riding the horse of the technology of today. And we can't lose.
Yes. Yes. And Dr. Jeffries, I think we can come back to you now, and let's
I want to come back to you and the audience.
Yes.
Because whoever controls the images controls the self-esteem, the self-respect, and the self-development. And we are subject to a devastation of negative images. But this particular image is the image we need to go away from this activity with. Professor Scobie, just to bring my brother in once more, he was such a powerful lecturer. This is a book on Bartholomew de las Casas. And to hear Ed either on radio or at the Apollo Theater, one of our lecture series, or at the First World Alliance, I mean, he made the history come alive. And Bartholomew de las Casas and his destruction of the indigenous peoples, that's Scobie wanted to make sure people appreciated that. But the great leaders have been meeting. They formed with the relationship of so many of them, they formed the AU. And then Professor Small and his relationship with El-Haj Malik, El-Shabazz, Malcolm X, they added the OAU, Organization of African Unity, had the OAU, Organization of African American Unity. Then it was refashioned to be the AU, and this became the symbol of the AU, and it really should be a symbol of us as African peoples. This is the largest monument of its kind. It's larger than the Statue of Liberty, which stands in the harbor of New York, and that Statue of Liberty in the harbor of New York was inspired by African peoples who helped to fight and save the French Republic. And so there was a Frenchman, Edward René Lafleur de la Boulaye, who called for a Statue of Liberty. It was not put in the harbor to represent the immigrants coming in from Europe. It represented the new consciousness, the new belief system. And so in Rio de Janeiro, in the great city of Rio de Janeiro, you have an image of Jesus the Redeemer. And in fact, that was given by the Italian Catholic community to the largest Catholic nation in the world, which is Brazil. And the statue of Jesus the Redeemer overlooking this great city of beaches and the bay. We went there every few years. We go to Brazil, and one year we went there. I took my nephew and his family, his wife and mother-in-law, etc. And that statue of Jesus the Redeemer overlooking this marvelous city, for the first time, they opened up the pedestal. And in the pedestal of Jesus the Redeemer in Rio is the shrine of the Black Madonna. The Black Madonna and child is a key part of any serious Catholicism. And so wherever we go, we need to see and read these statues. Now, this one was specifically made for us as African peoples, the founding peoples of the universe, the mother and father of ancient times. And it's the rise, not of a great man or a great woman or a warrior. It's the rise of the Black family. And there's the Black man rising and leaning on his rock, the Black woman, and holding his child. The most precious thing out of her sacred womb is this child. And he's holding the child up to the Creator. And we have to see and understand and appreciate this. There is nothing like it inside of it. You can go inside and take an elevator up 16 stories into the mind of the Black man. 30 or 40 people can stand inside his head looking out on the universe. That child there is not playing with the father. The child is being held up to the universal God consciousness, and that child is pointing across the ocean, not pointing north to Europe, where we usually look to sustenance. It's pointing across the ocean, linking the African population on the continent with the African population dispersed throughout the Western Hemisphere. And that sister is there to represent that it's a family affair, not a warrior affair as such, but it's the family in battle for real knowledge and understanding. Inside of this statue, which was put together by the heads of Senegal, heads of state of Senegal and South Africa and Nigeria, and others were given this task. Inside of it are the great works of our people. It's not a monument for nothing. They have the great works of Dr. Shekanta Diop and other scholars there. Inside of it, I'm standing under the pictures of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, and Kuma and whatnot. So this, if you ever get to Senegal, make sure you get a chance to visit this particular monument. And as I write up my history and my story, I will make sure it's a centerpiece.
Excellent, excellent. Lambi, you want? Let's take a call, Lambi. I know you've had someone waiting for a while.
Yeah, the overseas line seems to be burning up this evening. Caller, are you still there?
Yeah. This question is for both Dr. Smalls and Dr. Jeffries.
Yes.
The God consciousness and the whole idea of the reflections of African heritage in Christianity. It seems whenever it's painted, it leaves the impression as if the African has a right to embrace Roman Christianity. I'm not saying that's what it's intended, but the idea it gives, it sort of legitimizes Christianity as an African thing that we should follow. And when I researched this thing, I started on that premise, and what I saw was a distinction. Yes, there is justification archaeology for a brown Jesus at the very least, but Jesus Christ is not a black culture. The Jesus Christ story is not a black story in how it is presented in that New Testament. And so I just want to ask you guys to, if you can elaborate on that, because that essentially is my premises on this whole issue of Christianity, that we have to make a distinction between the Jesus construct and the Jesus Christ construct. I don't think the Jesus Christ construct is an African construct.
Yes, let me respond to that. You're both right and you're wrong. And that's why the question of African culture is essential. You're being serviced an African folkloric and historic experience called religion through white culture. You can get served that same thing through African culture and come up with another completely point of view. So the story of Christ, or that story that we hear in the Bible, the English Bible, coming out of European culture, is celebrated every year on the 11th of September as the oldest new year in the world. It is the Ethiopian New Year, which is being celebrated thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Christianity. Because it's not the story of a person, it is the story of a concept, of ideas and principle, when embodied in any person, will produce a certain behavior, you see. And so they've taken our story and put their folklore to it. That's why you can go back to ancient Egypt and you'll see the mother and the child and the father, Asar, Aset, and Heru. This is thousands and thousands and thousands of years before the Jesus date. Okay? So they're not real people we're talking about. We're talking about the principles that governs the universe, which is the essence of the divine. But men are not scientists in that way. The few who we call priests, who are the scientists in that way, must interpret it in folklore allegory and stories to the masses so that they grasp the understanding of the greater principles of the divine. If you go to the African-centered way, all men is Christ, all women is Christ. Let me explain that so the people don't get upset. Oh, this boy playing with our religion. No. What they're saying in the story is that when birth is given, that new life has come from the divine as the child of the divine. And it should be held sacred. And that story of Christ is a model of how to hold it sacred. And if you even go to the part of the dying, you will learn, if you study African culture, death is not considered to be final and this is the end of it. None of our cultures deal with death. Only European deals with this finality, this destruction. Not matter, nor energy can be destroyed. You can put my body in a jar and close it tightly when I die, and it will disappear over time out of that jar. Where does it go? You need to understand what they're trying to tell you in the story. The story is very simple. When God wants to create, the reason he's got a man standing there and a woman and a child is saying God is the creator, but the woman is the act of creation for the divine. The woman and the man is that aspect of the divine that begins the process of creation, and that woman is that aspect of the divine that carries out creation. You can't prove that any other way. You can't change that. So if you understand the symbol for the divine in the ancient African time was the three. The mother, the father, and the child is the symbol of divinity, because without those three, you have no creation. But I don't want to get complex, but I understand what you're saying. Western Christianity is not African Christianity. That's why you must study your history and get rid of the European cultural mystery and see, what did the African mean? Let me bring you, and maybe if I show you in a simpler time. In the Yoruba tradition, we call it the Yoruba religion. You call it Obia here and Voodoo there. But in that tradition, they've got a three. Her name is Oya. She means change. She's represented by the wind. And she marries Shango, who's the king, represents power, strength. But then she also marries a second man, Ogun, who's the god of iron and war. What has occurred in that metaphor? It's a story, it's not real. But the metaphor is saying power, like the king has, can develop arrogance, develop ego, and develop abuse of his people, which in the metaphor of Shango, that's what he does. He have his two brothers fight to death, and whoever wins, he's going to make rich. One of the brothers kill the other, and then all of a sudden he realizes, oh my God, I'm the cause of my brother's death. And he goes to commit suicide. But change cuts him down. The change is Oya, the woman. And so in the metaphor, the woman cuts him down. And we said, the king is not dead. The king is not dead. No, he is transformed. Or he's being transformed. And then the woman then married the other man, the god of iron, the god of war. What do you get iron from? You take a dirty rock full of all kinds of impurities. You throw it in the fire. The fire burns out the impurities, and you get transformation at the end of the day. That's what the story is about. And that's in the Yoruba telling it. Okay, that's the same story about Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That's the same story about Asar, Aset, and Haru. So it depends on who tells your story, how you will perceive the principles at the end of the day. So yes, the Europeans have taken Christianity and told it through their cultural eyes. Why can't we? We took it after slavery in the Caribbean and in the United States. And we created a different church than his church. We created a church of redemption. We created a church of revolution. We created a church of resistance against his tyranny. That wasn't the same church, has the same name, but it's not the same church. It's not the same function because the cultural intention is different. And all content, as Dr. Asa Hilliard taught us, have intent, but all intent comes from content. So we have to take the African culture and interpret the scripture. And you find out that book I recited, that the pyramid text, and the book called the Book of the Dead, the Coming Forth by Day, which is thousands and thousands of years older than the Bible, Torah, or the Quran, got all the same stories in it, interpreted different. Study your history, erase his cultural mystery, and you'll see what your ancestors had for you as a gift of wisdom.
Gentlemen, I mean, this is so interesting and so fascinating. I want to see if Lambi has a call that we can take before I go over to you, because we're coming almost towards the end of our program here tonight. Lambi, you want to take a call, or should I go right ahead?
Yeah, someone was asking about the numbers. Let me repeat those numbers one time. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. These are all local numbers, and the overseas number or the international number, 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Yes, and I just wanted to say that we very quickly have to wind down because our time is coming, to an end here for the program tonight. But I just wanted to, Gabriel, if there's something that you wanted to add before I go over to Dr. Jeffries for his sort of closing comments, I want to give you an opportunity. Then I would go back to Dr. Smalls for his closing comments, and then I'll come back finally to you, Gabriel. So, any word you want to put in at this point, Gabriel? And your mic is off. You need to turn on your mic, huh?
Without selling any documents to them, any passports, I hereby, on behalf of all the progressive Pan-Africanists, would like to induct both Brother Smalls and Brother Jeffries into the Dominican family, and so that you can feel welcome among your kith and kin. Gentlemen, it would be a high honor and privilege for us to have you again, and to have you joined with others who are desirous of that sort of collaborative, that was part of that community that we knew before we were injured in the transatlantic slave trade. We didn't begin with slavery. That was just an interruption. And here tonight, we're continuing the great effort of reconnecting all the strands of our common humanity. So I want to thank you again. I know there are many people who would like to call in, but I don't want to take more time because your words are more precious than mine. So I'll yield the floor to you, Brother Smalls, and maybe ask you one question that really, I think, concerned me because it was so profound. Why is it that so many Africans in the diaspora from the continent are not as Pan-African as West Indians, African Americans, and others?
Your mic, yeah.
Mike, James.
Yes, that's a very good question. And it was hard for me to answer, but then after Dr. Jeffries started taking me to Africa, he took me on my first trip, my second, my third, fourth, and most of my trips. I began to learn and study and understand. They're running away from the same oppression that we have tried to conquer where we are. And they think when they've arrived in the other place that they have escaped. They don't realize that they ran from the field of the enemy into the very house of the enemy. And because the same thing that was done to us in slavery was done to them in colonialism. Colonialism is just another word for slavery. Let's stop playing with it. Colonialism was slavery, plain and simple. And they did the same thing there. Cut the people off from their history, burnt the shrines, burnt the sacred groves, destroy our artifacts. They filled the museums of Europe with all of our spiritual implement, leaving us with nothing. And then saying, oh, we had nothing. Yes, because you stole it all. But what we must realize, everything they stole came from our minds and can be replicated again when that mind is free to love itself, to know itself, to understand itself, to express itself.
And I wanted to see if Lambi, you have a call for us.
Yes, we do. Caller on 95. Go ahead, please.
All right, let's keep going. I wanted to put two questions on the table here. First of all, Gabriel, we didn't get much of a chance to hear much about this man called Malcolm X. And I know you gentlemen know this man. Anything you can tell us and our audience about Malcolm X? Dr. Jeffries and Dr. Small, either one of you.
Well, I'll let Professor Small, Dr. Small, take it because he's epitomized Malcolm in so many ways, and it's a part of his development has been breathing new life into Malcolm, and so I think it's appropriate for him to express himself.
Thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
Small?
J. Yes, sir. Last night, Dr. J, I didn't call you because I forgot about it, so you can beat me up later. His daughter, Eliasa, held the memorial at the Audubon Ballroom where he was murdered.
Oh, wow.
About 300 or more people was there.
Yes.
It's one of the most beautiful memorials I've ever seen done by a child and children. She spoke on behalf of all of the sisters for their mother and their father.
Yes.
And Cornel West spoke, and you could see Malcolm's spirit took Cornel over. Yeah, I had to laugh at it later. He says, Small, you think I did good? I thought you did better than good tonight.
Yes.
Because the spirit of Malcolm came. That's another thing we don't understand well. That we have ancestral spirits that have never left us here. But Malcolm, think of Malcolm as his mom, and he's a son of the Caribbean and of North America. His mom is from the Caribbean, Grenada. His dad is from the United States of America. And the Caribbean and America married, and they produced this child. The American clan murders his father when he's 6. When he's in his preteen, they take his mother away because she resists them. So they put her in a mental hospital, which is worse than going into prison, because you don't need a court or a law to do that. And no one can get you out. Of course, he was able to get his mother out later. But he's left an orphan now with his brothers and his sister. And they try to take care of each other, but the state would separate them and send them to different foster homes. But his sister Ella came from Boston and took him because there was a story in the family that he was a special child and he was to be taken care of in the appropriate manner. And so he went to Boston. He was not living in poverty. His sister was a wealthy woman, you know, and he was like leaving the wealthy, good, high-class Black community to go hang out in the slums, you know, because that's what the crisis that he came out of, that's something he had gotten used to. He was a teenager when he committed those crimes they talked about. He was 17, 18 years old. He's in prison by the time he's 21. And he's only in prison for going to get a watch back from a pawn shop. He was no big-time gangster and dope dealer. That's a myth. That's why we have to learn the art of mythology and the science of reality, which we will do as we study history. So while he's in prison, his sister Ella gets him transferred from one prison to another. Why? So he would be at a library. One of the prisons had a library, the other didn't. So she wanted him to be at a library where he could learn and go back to school because he was a very good student. So by the time he's recruited by his sisters and brothers, all of whom had joined the Nation of Islam under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he was already Malcolm X. He was, Elijah Muhammad created him. Elijah didn't create his son Herbert into Malcolm. He did not create his son, his brother Elijah. He did not create Wallace or any of them. So he couldn't create Malcolm. Malcolm came with him with the stuff that was needed to do the job. And he was able to do that job. What was the job? He became an extraordinary teacher of truth. Truth about human rights, truth about civil rights, truth about transforming yourself from what Western society had beat you into the greater African man. Nobody really talks about him as the educator. Think now, this man is taking the scourge of our community, the drug addict, the alcoholics, the prison man, out of the prison, out of the scum, out of the gutter, and producing lawyers, doctors, teachers, businessmen, husbands. No one talk about the tens of thousands of men he saved that way. He was an extraordinary educator of ethics and morals, both through teaching and example. And we ignore that to have a discussion over whether he liked white people or don't like white people. That's not the discussion. Discussion is this extraordinary educator whose success in the redemption of Black men who had been left to die in the gutters and the prison, his success was greater than any single university in this country in any given year during the time period he was doing his teaching. But we don't talk about that man. But that's the man we better understand, because he not only spoke the wisdom and the truth, he lived the wisdom and the truth, and that had an effect when he took up the cause of human rights, and that's why the governments of the world killed him.
Well, thanks a lot for that explanation. I mean, I'm pretty sure lots of people listening out there, and especially people who are 40 years and younger, they know very little of Malcolm X. It's good to see what it is exactly that his life was all about. Okay, well, gentlemen, we're coming down to the end of it. I mean, Dr. Jeffries, I want to go over to you to sort of give your closing remarks. I wanted to know we appreciated you here so much tonight. It's over to you.
Well, certainly I want to thank you and your team because it has been a great chance for us to interact and get that message out so that people who are doubting Thomases can begin to understand that we are what we've been looking for, and we have to just transform ourselves into that fullness. And one of the great brothers who was an enslaved African, but who stepped out of his enslavement and found his way to freedom, Frederick Douglass, we always, as we were trying to form these young men, and we had the Sons of Africa, and we got others to develop the Daughters of Africa, we try to leave when we left each other with these words of empowerment that Frederick Douglass left us with. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men who want the crops without plowing up the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, it may be a political one, but it must be a struggle. And so unless we're prepared to make the great sacrifices to grow and develop and pull others along, we won't be able to fulfill our God-given essence. And so we just wanted to be able to help you get your message across. And we're very thankful that you've been so successful. Our little island became a giant space tonight. And so Professor Scobie is up in glory, throwing up a Black Power fist, and Dudley Thompson is up there throwing up a Black Power fist, and the other great sisters and brothers who come out of the struggle for freedom that it represents the African experience. So thank you. Madasi.
Don't forget Dr. Jeffries, our other brother, Bill Revere, who was with us also at Black Studies at City College.
Yes.
Mentioned Gil Noble today. It's his birthday.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance, Dr. Smalls, to make your sort of a closing remarks, because, I mean, I really and truly feel that we had a very good discussion tonight. And I really want to give you a moment to sort of speak to the Dominican people as we close.
Yes. I thank the people of Dominica for giving us the chance to come before them. And I thank you and your team. And I thank my teacher, Dr. Jeffries. And I'm 76, and he's my teacher. So that kind of tell you that he's a strong elder, stronger than most. And I think what we want to say when we think about great Dr. Edward Scobie and all the great things Dr. Scobie did, from fighting in the war, from becoming a pilot. I think Scobie was one of the first Black men to fly a jet plane, all right, in Britain. He told me that when they came up with the jet plane, the Americans put so much emphasis on them, but it wasn't the Americans, but the British who got the concept from the Germans. And Scobie, not fly it, he shot down the first one to shoot down one of Hitler's jet planes.
Right.
And so you get this extraordinary man. He's at the Pan-African Conference with Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Ezekwe, all the men that would become president of Africa. He's there with them as a young man in 45. And then he comes putting out this extraordinary magazine over in Europe. Then he comes home. Then he becomes mayor. And then he helps to found a political party. Then he became a revolutionary militant agitator. That's why he had to leave home. And then he came and became a scholar in America. Just one of the sons of Dominica. So I'm honored to be someone who have learned his instructions and be able to tell his people tonight, study Edward Scobie, read his work, and you will see this extraordinary transformation of a giant based on education, based on ethics and morals and high standard and a high caliber of life being demonstrated through his action. And so the chance just to talk about him with you tonight was a good thing for me.
You know, Dr. Smalls, within the next 3-4 weeks or so, we're going to continue our conversation. I mean, this Black History Month, I'm very happy to get this contribution from you and Dr. Jeffries tonight. We're going to continue talking about some of our leaders. And as we go forward, we're talking about our next leader, Oliver Seraphin, and then Eugenia Charles, then Mary Eugenia Charles, and Edison James, and so on. Then we come to Rosie Douglas, who you knew well.
Yes.
We're talking about him. We hope that we can get some contributions from you when we come to talk about Rosie Douglas, because you can speak about Rosie in a different way because you've seen the man and you know the man. And so then we're going to be talking right up to our current leader, who's Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit. And we would like, as we go along, to make the comparison, see the transition, see the changes that are taking place in the leadership over the years as the different eras come, the kinds of legacies that they're leaving behind compared to the legacies. When we speak about people like Ed Scobie, do you know that there's not too many Dominicans who know a lot about Ed Scobie and how much he has accomplished, how great he was? We didn't know that. A lot of people are learning that tonight from you. So we hope we will get a lot more from all of our other leaders as we go along to leave something in the minds of our younger generations that need to know more about the history. As you said, if you know the history, you remove the mystery. So Gabriel, I wanted to go over you to sort of bring the curtains down for us.
Yes, brothers, as you close it down, I just learned from one of our Sons of Africa, Charles Asekele Mitchell, that this is the birth date today of another giant from the Caribbean who was like a partner with Ed Scobie. This is Brother Gil Noble, who had the best TV show that one can imagine, and he was tight. We were family. And so to go out here with Scobie in our minds and with Gil Noble in our consciousness, that's a package that we need to present to our people. Their work lasts forever.
Thank you so much for that.
Yes,
Gabriel?
indeed. I just wanted to, as we salute Brother Jeffries and Brother Smalls, I just want to go down the list of some of the greats from Dominica in the Pan-African movement. So Ed Scobie, of course, we've talked about him all night. J. Ralph Casimir,
Yes.
Dr. Philip Potter, who helped South Africa become free.
Yes.
Dr. William Parr Revere, or Bill Revere, Joey Pelletier, Desmond Trotter Rascabinda, Atherton Martin, Rosie Douglas, Marlene Green, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, Dr. Dale Dangleman, Dr. Irving I.P. Pascal, Fred Hampton, Dr. Irving Andre, and there are many, many others.
Yes.
Many others who have made common cause with our people all over the world to advance the cause of freedom and progress, always premised on education, always premised on love of the human family and our commonalities, always premised on justice. So, gentlemen, my heart is full this evening. I feel that this evening we've arrived at the apex. In fact, I feel the presence of our greats in the midst. I feel the spiritual richness. And one of the things Brother Small spoke to Brother Jeffries is this struggle is not a material struggle. This struggle is a spiritual struggle. And unless we can feel the spirit of oneness, of kindness, of love, of honesty and justice, once we can do that, as Dr. King said some time back, we indeed shall overcome.
And I'll tell you, Dr. I.P. Pascal would agree with every word that you just said.
Well, he would have said, may the ancestors be pleased.
May the ancestors be pleased. Somebody said to me, the only person missing here tonight is Dr. I.P. Pascal. Let's shout out to Dr. I.P. Pascal and Dr. Irving Andre and Dr. Thompson Fontaine, Dr. Dion George, and all the rest of the crew. Gentlemen, there's absolutely nothing more I can add to all of what we have already said, except to thank you so much for being here tonight with us to contribute so much knowledge of our history, of our people, the greatness that lie in some of them. And really, we are a lot better now than we were 2 hours ago before you started this conversation with us. So let me just thank you and thank all our audience, all the people who have been with us on Facebook and on YouTube and on the radio land. Thank you so much for being with us. We did not take all of your calls tonight, but those whose calls we took, we appreciated your call. We hope that what our illustrious guest did tonight helped you in some way. And so tonight, I just want to say thank you, Lambi, for being on the console for us, and thank you, Sherwin, our engineer, for keeping us on the air. And gentlemen, a very, very warm thank you to you, and a very pleasant good night, each and every one of you. Gabriel, Dr.
Yes,
Smith, Dr. Jeffries, thank you so much, and have a good night, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
See some blessings.
All right, bye for now.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from.
That was a wonderful show.